meaning to reduce their staff because of it, you're using AI wrong, in my mind. Like, AI is about making your impact greater, not about cutting your costs. And that's one of the biggest problems with the whole big tech agenda right now, is the way that it's all being framed around cutting costs and driving efficiency is exactly the wrong.
Welcome back to Union Base. Really happy to have you back in our audience and our community. And today we have a really interesting speaker that I was really lucky to meet a few weeks back, who's been doing quite a bit of work on AI in labor. And so I think his perspective is going to be really interesting. And his name is Nick. And Nick heads up the Center for Responsible Union AI. He's worked as a digital strategist and consultant in nonprofits and trade unions, as well as think tanks. And now he runs AI training and leads up AI projects for the center. So welcome, Nick Scott, to Union Base.
Thank you, Lou. Lovely to be here. And thank you for inviting me on.
Of course. I mean, it's not very often that I come across people who are doing similar work. They're doing sort of AI-related union trainings. And I think this is quite the new space, so there's not many folks sort of working in it. But also you have a very, very compelling take on AI and labor. But before we jump into that, why don't you tell me a little bit about the center and the work you do there?
Sure. So the Centre for Responsible Union AI, it's a project by a UK-based organisation called Unions 21. Unions 21 is like it's a non-profit, a think tank, insights organisation for the union movement. And historically it's done reports and training on things like digital data usage, trying to help unions basically modernize their operating model. So it's, I guess, really focused on the existing union infrastructure, trying to make unions exist stronger. So it's about that kind of base of union activity and how to help them understand how they as organizations need to change. And the centre, I guess it came from conversations I had with the executive director of Unions 21 a couple of years ago, where she actually approached me to talk about digital consultancy. And don't get me wrong, unions need some support sometimes on digital strategy and digital consultancy. But at that point I said, what are they doing on AI? Because I used to work at Unison, which is the largest or one of the largest UK trade unions. And my sense, I guess my assumption was that they'd be maybe relatively active in terms of the policy side of AI, so thinking about how AI affects their members and the workplaces they represent, but not have spent any time thinking, well, this is a technology and what does it do for us as an organization? How does it affect us? What are staff going to do? What are staff feeling and thinking? And more or less, Becky said, that's exactly what's happening. She talked to a few general secretaries, she made inquiries, and that's more or less what was happening. So the Centre for Responsible Union AI is a kind of project. It's an evolving project. As we see where there's need, it evolves. But it's in a project to try and help unions connect, share use cases, share the ways they're working, and really kind of deal with what is a really thorny issue for them. Because it's, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but it's not easy to think about how you use AI as an organization when it's very clear that AI has a large impact on labor and workers. So you have to kind of balance. There's a lot of risk of hypocrisy, a lot of risk of being undone. So that's where a kind of independent organization like Unions 21 can actually step in and kind of help a little bit.
Right. So let's get into it. I mean, that's sort of the conversations we're having as well. We're having AI and labor trainings that we're doing with labor leaders here in the U.S. And there's a lot of concerns around privacy and security, access to LLMs and lack of transparency, large language models for folks who may not be familiar with the technology, with the terminology. But I'll start with the simple question: should unions adopt AI?
So I guess I have two answers to that question. One is my personal answer, which is I see enough value in what I've experienced and used to think that there are opportunities and they should adopt some elements of AI. The second answer is that's the wrong question. Should they engage with AI? Should they understand AI? Is the right question. Should they decide to adopt AI? Is the question is the thing that's important. And what I worry about is that they decide. Sorry, that they just don't make a decision at all. And not making a decision is a decision. It's a decision it's a strategic decision at the end of the day, and it will have its impact. And I do think that we need to engage with a technology that, if the promise of the technology, whether you believe it or not, one of the promises is it can remove burdensome work and make the quality of work better. Well, for unions, that's a promise worth engaging with. Maybe it'll turn out to be false, or not in all cases, or that the kinds of moral or ethical or other dilemmas and kind of basically you have to make too many adjustments and you decide not to do it. All of those are good reasons not to do it if you don't want to, if you come across those. But we just need to engage and then decide whether we adopt.
Right, right. And, as one of the, I think, few people in the labor movement myself who has been talking about, technology for going on 10 to 15 years now, the gut reaction is usually to just ignore it or, be afraid of it or think about it as taking jobs, which we'll go a little bit into that. What do you make of the fear that AI tools are controlled by tech companies and that those companies may be antagonistic to labor?
It's true. I mean, you can't deny that, and I think that we live in a world that where we have to make all sorts of, I think, harsh and decisions that really tear at the heart about what we use. I use an iPhone. I use it, and it's full of minerals that have been mined in some place by people who have been basically abused in all sorts of ways as part of that process. I use the iPhone, and that's just one of many, many examples in our lives. I'm not saying that we just go ahead and do everything, but our role the role of the union movement is to fight it now, to fight the injustices, to fight where there's an inequality. Not to say, and sometimes that fighting will mean saying we don't do something, we don't use something, but sometimes it will say we need to change the way it works. And I think the connection there for me is, how can you fight big tech unless you understand the technology itself? And that's the bit I want. I want unions to be able to go and say, look, this is technology that offers these kinds of benefits, but these things are no good. We're going to fight those bits, because that's actually, those are bigger. We all know, I'm not an expert at campaigning, but when I did work at a union, we talked about finding the campaigns we can win. We can influence change. We can't influence the wholesale rejection of technology. That's probably out of our ballpark. But we could influence it to change it so that it's a better deal for workers, for the environment, for everything else, frankly. And there is a long list of people that get harmed by the way the big tech operates, and some of the underlying ways in which the technology has been designed.
I think that's brilliant. And I think it's accurate as well. I think a lot of times we forget that there are people who work in big tech as well who are thinking about this stuff. There's people who work in Silicon Valley and a lot of the largest companies who are concerned about the way that AI may or is currently affecting labor. And so to completely write it off, I think would be sort of missing opportunity for organizing opportunities, but also, you don't want to get lost in the direction that the world is headed and sort of be dragged by it. So what would you say are the barriers to implementation that you've observed as you've been doing these trainings for unions, not necessarily adopting AI, but learning about it and sort of gaining expertise in it, especially if they have like limited resources to go around?
So I'd say, there's quite a few, but one of the biggest ones is is actually the lack of good examples of what it can do. People are lost often in terms of they've heard hype, but they can't turn that into something that feels tangible to them. They can't. They don't know where to go, what to do, how to do it, and so that's one side and frankly, the union leadership in many cases is the furthest behind of that in those areas. So you have a challenge with lots of people who are don't know where to start. They feel completely lost. It moves really quickly. Like anyone that calls themselves an AI expert, really? Are you an AI expert for something that changes so quickly? How can you call
Not
yourself an AI
possible.
expert?
Exactly.
So this sense of how do you grapple with something that feels so new, feels so different, feels overwhelming, feels scary, um, and that your union isn't supporting you because the leaders also feel all of those things. Not because it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a union leadership that's trying to close ranks or whatever. It just means that those are humans that are in exactly the same position. And so that causes problems on one side. I guess the other side is that there are lots of people that do use it and have started using it in various ways. And that's not a barrier, obviously, because they're using it, but their barrier is a different one. Their barrier is that they test something and they're not given training. They're not given support and advice. They don't maybe do so effectively. There is a bit of a mindset shift in my mind between particularly the tools that people can access every day, let's be honest, are generative AI tools. That's most when you're talking about AI for an individual, that's a generative AI tool. There's different problems for the kind of other types of AI that aren't ChatGPT. That's more an organizational challenge. But at the individual level, if someone tries ChatGPT, tries Copilot, tries Gemini, whatever you want to call it, one day, they will often treat it as if it's a Google search. They'll type in a few words and then they'll get back a really generic rubbish response.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because they don't understand the technology and they don't understand it works in a completely different way from Google. As I say in the courses often, Google have spent a lot of time honing their AI and adding structure and data to their AI so that you can type in a few words and get what you want, and then you have to do the work to find the exact bit you want. The AI that we're seeing now is very different. You have to do a lot of the work. You have to provide the data. You have to provide the structure, and that's a bit of a mindset shift for people. So I guess you have the two big barriers. I'd say one is there's a whole bunch of people that don't know where to start and aren't given any support, and then there's another bunch of people that are starting but maybe are not often, unless they have lots of time and dedication, are not often using it in a very effective way, and they then turn off. You get lots of people who start their journey, find it's really generic, and think, do you know what? The hype is completely overblown. There's nothing in this for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those are the
Yeah.
two areas my training tries to, when we do the fundamentals training, which is the kind of base level training, those are the two barriers we're working against, is helping people to persuade people that have tried it, that actually it's not, don't write it off because that's writing off too soon, and therefore that, going back to the original point, you're not going to be able to understand the power of it and therefore not engage in the conversations in an informed way. And it is powerful. It's sometimes dramatically, like it takes your breath away sometimes. It feels, like a very knowledgeable person. And then the other side is the people who are too scared to start.
Yeah, we've had a very similar experience with our trainings with labor leaders on AI because, there's some level of apprehension and you want people to be comfortable with just, using these tools, knowing what's out there. And there's so many tools popping up every day. But then I think the conversation of now that you know the tool, let's talk about how you can use this for negotiations and research, et cetera, is almost a different conversation. Like the first half is literally just us walking them through sort of, how did AI become a big thing so quickly? How did ChatGPT grow to the fastest growing app so quickly? And you sort of have to get people to the understanding of the basics before you can go to, and that includes a conversation around safety issues around data, entering personal information, a lot of that. But I think the 102 course, and we should talk about this another time or maybe our next chat, but maybe it could be, how do you build out a system that is safely used by unions? Should it be, open source? What tools should we be using and shouldn't we be using for the ideological differences that exist for labor unions and workers versus the people who create these tools? But that leads into my next question. How can unions both organize workers, such as content editors, and advocate for workers affected by AI? So, in other words, is there a conflict of interest
Yeah.
to be trying to organize these workers who work within these companies, but also say that you are, against the loss of jobs created by AI?
I mean, let's not deny it's a tough ask, um, uh, and it's a line that has to be straddled really carefully. There's a lot of, we have to be really clear about politics is such a big thing in unions. Democratic organizations, doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing can have consequences for people, and it can lead to people the risk of that, of a blowback, of getting it wrong, of making the wrong decision, can lead to people choosing not to engage. I've had big unions that have decided not to run AI, even experimental projects, because they're worried about political risk. But I think it is possible. I think it's possible, but it has to be done in a transparent way with values at the core. We have to sometimes make arguments for why we will engage in using AI, where it adds to our impact as an organization and our ability to make change on behalf of those workers, and how we are using it in a way that is 100% protective of those workers. Let's not, unions are not generally, I'm not as, I don't know as much about the US situation as I do about the European situation, but I don't see unions full of people who are running around with nothing to do. We have needs for resources, and part of AI's promise is that leveling up of resource gaps. This is not work that would, quite often it's not work that would go to anyone, otherwise it's work that wouldn't get done. And actually, or workers in our organizations using AI for things that don't give them much joy in their working life. So AI used to make staff work in a more, on the things they enjoy more, focus their value and their time on the things that you need humans for, rather than the things that are, copying and pasting between cells in a spreadsheet. Do we need 2 hours of that? I don't think we do. So I think it's about being very clear when you're using AI, when you're not, having a process, having policies, principles, whatever having a kind of guideline that you can refer to and that does rule what you do and is very worker friendly in it. Taking a very experimental role, not rolling something out, not rolling a chatbot for your member support out to all of your members without having kind of A, experimented, B, talk to people, being member centric about the way you approach things. And then I guess the final bit is this sense of always choosing, being very careful with your use case selection, so that you're picking the things where you're adding value and being transparent about it. Never using AI without telling people that you're using AI, because actually, ultimately, that transparency, the more you're transparent, the earlier you're transparent, the more you're going to raise those problems before they become a huge thing. And you can have that conversation and you can make decisions. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong. That's the other thing. We need to understand. We need to be able to say, do you know what, we got this wrong sometimes, but we were doing it with honest intentions. Obviously, any union that rolls out AI and has documents or conversations where they are documenting or having or basically meaning to reduce their staff because of it, you're using AI wrong in my mind. Like, AI is about making your impact greater, not about cutting your costs. And that's one of the biggest problems with the whole big tech agenda right now, is the way that it's all been framed around cutting costs and driving efficiency is exactly the wrong. And as far as I can see, all of the evidence is proving it's not going to work that way. The evidence that you see time and time again when they do experiments, actually you're not really getting a huge efficiency leap. You're getting a quality leap. You're getting an impact leap. That's good. We should aim for that. That's a great thing for organizations on the side of people to have.
That's wonderfully put. I actually wonder, do you see a significant difference between how UK and US unions approach AI? I know you're not super familiar with the American context, and the ones that are most visible is like, Elon Musk trying to fire the entire government and replace them with AI and things like that. But in terms of your experience with the unions, I'm curious, what are you seeing?
So to the extent that I can comment, because it is limited, the things I see that do feel a little bit different are clearly in the US. You've got big unions that are, and you've got big tech headquarters there. So deals between Microsoft or others and unions, I don't think are happening in Europe, or they're definitely not happening in the same kind of way. And things like like I think also the teachers in the States have done deals with AI. I haven't seen that happening in Europe yet. Obviously, Europe. I think that the debate feels much more focused on data rights and data privacy. Not to say that that's not something that's important to the US, but the European Union, like the legislation, there is a much more of a focus on getting this into legislation because that is an option. We can try to get the EU to, because the EU's got the AI Act where that's, you're not in the same place basically on those, and frankly right at the moment that's not going to happen. So I think that there's the way that unions are handling some of the debates probably is much more focused on that kind of influence. I think there's, and in terms of the internal stuff, actually no, like the basic core of, there's loads of stuff using AI tools. The leaders don't all know quite how prevalent that is. There's not much training going on yet. There's not many organizations with policies, AI policies yet, or they're still in developing phases. It's those kind of core, the use of AI at the organizational level for example within an AI specific project, it's limited to the most advanced or the most kind of technologically innovative unions. Those things feel very similar.
Interesting. And have you found unions to be more receptive or less receptive to artificial intelligence than previous technologies that have been rolled out?
So I think the biggest difference here, in my mind, is not the unions, but it's the staff. So I used to, as I said, I used to run digital at Unison. Used to be head of digital, and I mean, I never did this, but I know if I set up a webinar on digital and advertised it around unions, you'd get your digital organizers and digital comms officers would come along, and not many other people. You do a webinar on AI, you get HR, you get education, you get admin, you get people from all over the shop. And why is that? Because actually the promise is heard by lots of people, and it's quite a lot of people find that of interest. Like, obviously the hype is a really important part of it, but it's not just hype, because we've had hype before, we've had hype on other things, but it's hype that links to a promise that people are like, do you know what, that actually would be good. I would like to save some time on this menial task. I do spend too much time writing up meeting notes, and I spend days writing up meeting notes. Maybe I could do that quicker and spend some other time doing something that's much more valuable. Those things are heard, so there's interest from staff, and I think that changes the nature of the conversation between organizations, and there's a lot more bottom-up pressure. It's much more common, I think, on AI than it might be on other things, to find that the reason that we get some interest from a union is because some members of staff have come to our training and are now saying, well, which tool can we use? Have we got a policy? What's got, like, that kind of bottom-up pressure? We need to move forward is I think broader and more powerful.
I agree. What have you seen to be, or what are you talking about as the practical uses of AI for unions specifically? Because I mentioned this at the top of the call that we have been talking about creating resources specifically for unions and sort of trying to survey the unions who are using it, figuring out how they're using it. The thing that comes up time and time again is research.
Yeah.
Because they have these really amazing university tools that can create a research paper in seconds, but obviously it can't do what a traditional Cornell trained ILR school researcher can do. But you could potentially train an agent to take major parts of the task, especially if it has a lot of background on what the context is of the research that you're doing. I'm curious what other practical uses you might find, or what you might think of that type of thing like research.
So one of the questions we have asked I ran an AI survey earlier this year of union staff. Now, I should say that the people that responded to this, they came through our network, so they're probably among the most AI friendly people, but not exclusively. It was communicated and circulated in certain unions. There's some unions that are really well represented, and someone sent an internal email about this. So it's not 100% just our kind of closest group. And one of the questions asked is, where have you used AI? What kinds of tasks have you used AI in? And the biggest answer in terms of the different categories was developing text, writing, editing. 52% said they tried that a few times. Of the people, there's a few hundred people that have responded. The second one is actually transcribing and translating. So I think obviously that's a big thing in Europe. There's going to be lots of unions that have multiple languages that they have to handle as part of their day-to-day operations. And there's federations and so on that do the same thing. So translation, I think, is really important there. Research came third, is 35%. And so those are the big buckets, and more or less they fit what you hear about. Definitely text is the thing you most hear about. And then when we've talked to unions, we have collected some case studies of unions and union staff that are using it. Some of the stuff they've done is really interesting. So we have a case study on our website of a union officer who they have a kind of case letter process, and they have to create a very basic case letter that I think, just as I understand it, just tells a story of the case, and it's all anonymized to the member and so on. It used to take them half an hour. Now it takes them 3 minutes because they have a Copilot prompt to do it in. Another one was someone who came on one of our training courses, and she now uses it. She uses ChatGPT to help her to create agendas for workshops with reps and then facilitate it. So I define a good facilitative techniques for their workshop and the agenda and so on. So those kinds, I think, really kind of a lot of different use cases. When you come to it, you get lots of people saying very different things. There isn't, and I think that's kind of in line with the technology. It's a really individualistic technology, generative AI in particular.
Interesting. And do you see a role for negotiation, member engagement, organizing in AI in the future?
Yeah, so already I think at least in well, I mean, there is a organizer who is using Claude to spin up applications and little member applications that are doing all sorts of really interesting things. So at the kind of that level, I think it's really interesting for the idea of organizing campaigning, being able to do like one-off little things that meet a particular need. But as a more general thing, I've got three or four the Australians, an Australian union organization, a Belgian, and actually one in the States that I've been talking to recently, and they're all creating kind of collective bargaining chatbots. So they range in what they're trying to do. Some are just like being able to refer to different agreements and find commonalities in different agreements, or create a sample agreement for a workplace. Others are thinking about simulations, so negotiation simulations, where you can have a rep that simulates a negotiation with an employer based on that has the data from the union, but also from this particular negotiation. So I think lots of different ideas coming out. There isn't one big idea, and there aren't yet, I think, many kind of completed products out there. They're all still in testing phases.
Interesting. One of the things that comes up again and again is public AI. And, I'm actually going to put a link to the paper on public AI in the comments, along with anything you'd like to share with the audience in case they want to contact you for training or get connected to Unions 21 or you. It's a great way to connect with people who are like-minded on the topic in this growing community. But public AI is something that's come up a lot. There's a lot of participants in this group with the same title that come from Europe. Surprisingly, I'm one of the few Americans in that group. There's a few of us specifically from the American labor movement in that group, and some of them will likely be watching this. What would you say, and this is such an interesting day, Liberation Day for Americans, where our pockets are being liberated. There's this sort of isolationist trend that's happening in the country right now. And, I was thinking yesterday about whether the Canadian unions will ever invite me back up to talk again, or if those relations, I may have to send some emails and just apologize and just say how much I care about them. But, in the context of the American sort of shift that might be happening or that is happening over the next 4 years, do you see any possibility for cross-border collaboration on regulation? I mean, obviously in the U.S., the likelihood of regulation is pretty much dead now over the next 4 years, specifically around AI and really anything. But is there some collaboration maybe on public AI? Are there ways for us to support each other cross-border, even though, maybe the political climate isn't the most friendly?
Yeah, yeah. We have ultimately we share so much in terms of need, values, and ultimately the tech or the systems we have. We're not diverging yet. And I was having a conversation today about what happens if I need to not use Apple anymore. And I was like,
We're rethinking all of our choices right now. We're realizing, it's been a global economy for a long time,
exactly. And it would take a lot. We've been surprised. So, I'm not saying it's not possible. It would take a lot to undo the level of commonality we have. And definitely what won't go, I doubt, the fact I even have to say doubt, is the ability to connect across borders, the ability to have this kind of conversation. And so I think that I think it's in the interests of all groups in all countries that have shared goals to be connecting on it. And that's why the Centre for Responsible Union AI exists. It's a very specific goal of let's share what we're doing and learn together. But that doesn't really matter whether you're in Europe or in Australia or in the US. Let's try and find a way to do it, because AI allows us to do it across languages and the internet allows us to do it across borders, and let's use this technology to move us all forward at a faster pace for whatever our different goals are, for whatever our different contexts are. There'll be bits that aren't relevant and bits that are, and that's fine. And the same kind of thing in terms of regulation. There's a great benefit in actively influencing for better regulation in the EU from the states, because some does end up being trickling down. Some does end up being incorporated into how US systems work. Data protection, some aspects of data protection, as I understand, and this is not something I'm an expert in, but there is a Brussels effect where you have things that are decided and regulated in the EU end up influencing others, and that's just one of many processes. Other processes work in other ways and work from the US back, but we need to see this as a connected thing and try and find all routes to move us forward. And that's also about ecosystems. That's about you and me connecting, but it's also about other people that work in a completely I spend quite a lot of time trying to make sure we're connected into the people who completely say AI should not be a thing. Why? Because actually their view and their role is really important, and I need people like that to tell me when I'm going wrong. Sometimes I will be too enthusiastic about something, and I need people to put me right. Definitely, when I've worked in house at an organization, if I haven't had a data protection officer to say, Nick, you're not necessarily always being. This is a great idea, and you're going to get lots of data, but what's it for? I'm like, I don't know. Okay, maybe I.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we need naysayers. We need people who have different perspectives. And that's really what this channel is about, honestly. It's not just about bringing, honestly, I think over the last few months that we've been doing this and the community has been growing, we have been bringing in folks who typically are on the labor side. But what we're going to start doing is bringing some investors in AI, some of the builders, and maybe even people we can argue with, right? Who just think, AI is, not worth even touching. There's plenty of folks like that. There's some people who think it, I think that YouTube is pretty much flooded with people who think, AI is the answer for everything, and so I don't know if it's necessarily to give more space to that necessary. Maybe people who are open-minded, and we could have an exchange with on that. I'd love to have you back actually, and dive deeper into the numbers, right? There's some studies that have been going on in the US around how industries have been changing, what they're projecting to be the job laws. I think people would think that's interesting. But beyond that, I would love to think more about how we could do a cross-border collaboration. Can we get together a group of unions who are sort of AI curious, and wanting to approach the ethics and the problematic parts, but also figure out what might be useful if there is engagement to be made in public AI, and to engage with the Center for Responsible AI that you all are building over there, and see if there's some way for us to, build it from the bottom up, as you said.
Yeah, I'm on board.
Wonderful. Well, look, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm 100% sure our audience is going to enjoy it. And like I said, I'll put information on how to contact Nick Scott at the bottom in the description. And Nick, any last words for us on AI? I know we covered a ton of subjects, but given the speciality of your work and the rareness of finding someone who does what you do, I'd love to hear you sort of give us the closing word.
I guess the thing I most often say to people when I talk to them about AI is, we have a role in the union movement. I mean, we have a role to influence for the way in which technology is adopted, and we need to be really clear that this technology is being adopted really fast, and much faster than we're used to. It means we need to move at a faster rate. We need to understand it quicker, and then make responses quicker. And we need to approach it with an open mind, but our values very clearly at the center. I think, one of the things I spoke at a conference for Uni Global back in November, and they put me on before Darren Acemoglu, who's a Nobel Prize winner, and I received the agenda. I was like, I'm on before a Nobel Prize winner. What's he going to say? If he says the completely opposite thing to me, then I'm going to look a real fool.
That's tough.
It's a tough gig. But he said unions need to be technology leaders, not followers. And I deeply believe that. I think that if we look back at our history, we are strong when we use the technologies of the time in a adept way, even to fight the worst parts of those same technologies. And that's what we need to do with AI. We need to sometimes use it, sometimes fight it, sometimes use it to fight it. And that's not a bad situation to be in. That's not a bad challenge to have, is how to do that. It's a challenge that we have and we need to take now.
Brilliantly put. Nick, Scott, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.